this is the last chapter that's going to be included on the first exam. This is chapter 5, covers consciousness. So one disclaimer I do want to give is I have like some bronchitis or upper respiratory thing going on right now, so there will be occasional pauses. So consciousness. So about 1/5 of college students in a survey believed aliens visited us in our dreams, and about 10% believed they had been visited by aliens when they hadn't. Many of the people in this survey had a history of sleep paralysis, which is a state of being unable to move just after falling asleep or right before waking up. So some of you may have heard about like sleep paralysis, shadow people, stuff like that in the popular media, and it's a thing. About 1/3 to half of college students report having at least one episode of sleep paralysis. This may sound scary, but it's really no reason to be concerned. This is really just caused by a disruption in the sleep cycle and is often accompanied by anxiety or terror. Some therapists don't consider sleep paralysis as a diagnosis, so they attempt hypnosis, which, as I've mentioned before, is flawed for several reasons. The main one being the creation of false memories. And this is just one of the interesting states of consciousness. And consciousness is just a subjective experience of the world, our bodies, and our mental perspectives. We'll cover in this chapter. The line between our waking state and our sleep is thin to non-existent. It's estimated we spend about 30 to 50% of our waking hours mind-wandering, fantasizing, and flitting from one task, irrelevant, or dreamlike thought to another. While some may view this fantasizing as unhealthy, fantasizing and daydreaming are perfectly normal and honed by thousands of years of natural selection. Most people can easily focus their attention when needed to respond to virtually any situation or threat efficiently and often unconsciously. Alterations in awareness and ability to control awareness are seen throughout the animal kingdom as well. For example, dolphins sleep with one hemisphere sleeping and the other alert. After a few hours, the hemispheres swap. So the biology of sleep. So we spend approximately 1/3 of our lives asleep. While it's obvious sleep is crucial to our health and daily functioning, psychologists still don't know exactly why. Some theories believe it plays a critical role in new learning, storing memories, and remembering emotional information. Others believe it plays a role in our immune system, which makes sense considering how people tend to sleep more when they're sick or aren't feeling well. Some believe brain activation during sleep is essential to waking consciousness and our ability to plan, reason, and function to the best of our ability. So, a circadian rhythm is cyclical changes that occur on a roughly 24-hour basis in many biological processes. This includes hormone release, brain waves, body temperature, and drowsiness. This is commonly known as the brain's biological clock, which is an area of the hypothalamus that's responsible for controlling our levels of alertness. This biological clock makes us feel drowsy at different parts of the day. This part of the brain is the reason some people are night owls and some are early birds. People can have different biological clocks that make them drowsy at different times. The biological clock works by releasing melatonin, which is a neurotransmitter that tells our brain it's time to sleep. When a biological clock is disrupted, like from working the graveyard shift or having jet lag, it can negatively affect us, like an increased risk of injury, diabetes, accidents, etc. A recent study done revealed that the average American gets approximately 7.18 hours of sleep a night, while nearly 30% reported getting less than 6 hours of sleep a night. This isn't good. Most adults need 7 to 10 hours of sleep per night. Newborns need about 16 hours of sleep over a 24-hour period, but there is a small portion of the population, like less than 1%, small portion, that have a genetic mutation on a gene called DEC2, which allows them to sleep 6 hours or less a night without crashing the next day. College students need approximately 9 hours of sleep per night, but most sleep no more than 6 hours a night. There's also a common misconception that the elderly don't need as much sleep as us, but they still need 7 to 10 hours. Typically, there aren't a lot of negative consequences of losing 1 hour of sleep other than feeling irritable, edgy, or unable to concentrate well the next day. However, if this persists over several days, we will begin to feel worse, less attached to reality, and this creates what's known as a sleep debt, which can require at least several nights of sleeping a few extra hours to get caught up on sleep. People deprived of numerous nights of sleep or cut back drastically on sleep often experience mild depression, difficulties in learning, difficulties paying attention, problems in thinking clearly, problem solving, decision making, increased emotional reactivity, and slowed reaction. Sleep deprivation has been linked to multiple negative health outcomes, like increased activation of the sympathetic nervous system, leading to conditions like high blood pressure and heart problems, as well as a suppressed reaction of the immune system to infections or viruses. The massive increase in rates of diabetes in the US in recent years is largely due to Americans' chronic sleep deprivation, but this is controversial. Loss of sleep has also been tied to friendly fire incidents in the Gulf War. As I've mentioned before, it's important to consider racial and ethnic differences in everything in psychology. People of color, so Hispanic, Latinx, African Americans, Asian Americans, tend to sleep less and less well than their white counterparts, but the reason behind this is unclear. Some psychologists believe this to be due to systemic factors like class and education, which can contribute to daily life stressors. And the more stressors a person experiences, the more likely they are to have or to sleep less and sleep worse. As with everything, too much can be a bad thing. One teenager in southern England slept for 2 weeks straight, uninterrupted due to a rare medical condition known as Klein-Levin syndrome, aka sleeping beauty disorder. Her parents would need to wake her every 22 hours to feed her and take her to the bathroom, after which she immediately fell back asleep. One of the major stages of sleep is called REM, or rapid eye movement sleep. In a study done, almost all participants reported vivid dreams if they were able to reach REM, but were much less likely to report these vivid dreams if they were awoken while not in REM sleep. Any stage that is not REM sleep is called NREM, which stands for non-REM sleep. Using groundbreaking equipment, Kleitman and Dement discovered that during sleep we pass through 5 stages repeatedly, with each cycle lasting 90 minutes, and each stage of sleep is clearly distinguishable from awake states, as shown in the diagram here. So the first stage is stage 1 sleep. This is the lightest level of sleep. The dad telling you they were only resting their eyes level of sleep. The I was watching that, but you were actually asleep level of sleep. This lasts for about 5 to 10 minutes. The brain powers down to about 50%, which produces theta waves. These occur 4 to 7 times per second. These are slower than beta waves, which occur 13 times per second, that occur during waking stages. As we fall asleep, we may experience hypnagogic imagery, so scrambled, bizarre, and dreamlike images. We may also experience sudden jerks, which are commonly called myoclonic jerks, of our limbs as if being startled or falling. So we discussed reflexes in Chapter 3. These myoclonic jerks are a sort of reflex. Not everyone experiences them, but they are fairly common. Stage 2 sleep. So our brainwaves slow down even more than they did in stage 1. Sudden intense bursts of electrical activity called sleep spindles of about 12 to 14 cycles a second, and occasionally sharp rising and falling waves known as K-complexes. K-complexes only occur when we're sleeping. As our brain activity decelerates, our heart rate slows, our body temperature drops, and our muscles relax even more. And our eye movements stop. We spend about 65% of our sleep in this stage. As far as stages 3 and 4, so originally these were 2 separate stages, but recent research has compounded them into one stage. And about 10 to 30 minutes after light sleep, we move to slow wave sleep, where we experience delta waves, which are as slow as 1 or 2 cycles per second. In stage 3, delta waves appear 20 to 50% of the time. In stage 4, they appear more than half of the time. Alcohol tends to suppress delta wave activity, which is why you often feel more tired in the morning after drinking. Kids spend about 40% of their sleep in this stage, which is why we have the phrase sleeping like a baby. So after about 15 to 20 minutes, we go back to stage 2, but the brain waves emulate waking brain waves, and this is REM sleep, which is when the brain is most active and during which vivid dreaming often occurs. During REM, our heart rate increases, our blood pressure elevates, and we experience rapid or irregular breathing. This occupies about 20 to 25% of our sleep. After 10 to 20 minutes of REM, we move back to the lighter stages of sleep, starting the cycle over, as you can see depicted in this diagram. The sleep cycle repeats 5 to 6 times. While the sleep stages are not as rigid as depicted here, this provides a good idea of how we move through sleep throughout the night. And we don't only dream in REM sleep, we just dream more during REM. REM dreams are also illogical, emotional, and prone to shift in plot. Think of it as M. Night Shyamalan or Stanley Kubrick directing your dreams at this point. REM is probably evolutionarily necessary. Depriving rats of REM sleep typically leads to their death within a few weeks. When people are deprived of REM for a few nights, we then experience what's called REM rebound, which is when the amount and intensity of REM sleep increases, suggesting that REM serves a critical biological function. During REM sleep, our supercharged brains are creating dreams, but our bodies are relaxed and essentially paralyzed. A misfire here can lead to REM behavior disorder, which is where people physically act out their dreams. While only about 1 in 200 people experience this, after age 60, this rises to 2%, and as high as 6% in people older than 70. Recent research believes this disorder to be an early warning sign of dementia or Parkinson's. So one reason I wanted to include this diagram is sleep is often depicted in a circular fashion, which, as we can see here, is not exactly how it goes. So as we progress through sleep through the night, we stop dropping into stage 3 and stage 4 nearly as much, and we tend to stay in the lighter levels of sleep. So lucid dreaming. While it is common for people to believe there is a clear distinction between waking and sleeping, lucid dreaming challenges this notion. Lucid dreaming is when you're dreaming, but you know you're dreaming. Most of us have experienced this at least once. 1/5 of Americans experience lucid dreaming once a month, but less than 5% experience it on a weekly basis. Using brain imaging, researchers recently found that during a lucid dream, parts of the cerebral cortex with self-perceptions and evaluating thoughts and feelings begin to activate. Another study found evidence to suggest lucid dreams are a hybrid state of consciousness with features of both. And then lucid dreaming opens up the possibility of controlling our dreams. If you've heard of lucid dreaming in popular media, this is often the context in which it's used. Lucid dreaming during a nightmare can help improve the dream's outcome, but there's no evidence to suggest that controlling our dreams can help us overcome depression or other mental illnesses. So as far as sleep disorders, nearly all of us experience trouble falling asleep or staying asleep from time to time. When we experience sleep disturbances, it affects our ability to function at work or school. It can affect our mental health as well. So one of the more common sleep disorders is insomnia, which is difficulty falling and or staying asleep. It can take three forms: having trouble falling asleep, so if you take more than 30 minutes to doze off, waking up too early in the morning, waking up during the night, and having trouble going back to sleep. An estimated 7.2% of costly workplace accidents and errors are tied to insomnia. However, this does need to be taken with a grain of salt because this is simply a correlational result, not a causal one. Short bouts of insomnia are often the result of stress and relationship problems, medication and illness, working late, variable shifts, and many other things. It's recommended that if you have trouble falling asleep, to hide clocks so you don't become preoccupied with falling asleep in a timely manner. Sleep in a cool room, go to bed, and wake up at regular times. Avoid caffeine, avoid naps during the day, and avoid watching TV or using the internet before bed because research has shown that blue light can interfere with your ability to fall asleep. Sleep pills can be effective, but research has shown that brief psychotherapy is more effective than sleeping pills on treating insomnia. These are also addictive, and prolonged use can create a dependency on the pills. Narcolepsy is a disorder characterized by the rapid and often unexpected onset of sleep. The urge to sleep can strike at any time. Obviously, this can interfere with day-to-day functioning and be disturbing, so it's not surprising that nearly 20% of people that suffer from this disorder experience serious depression or social anxiety. Surprise, elation, or strong emotions can make a person with narcolepsy experience cataplexy, which is complete loss of muscle tone, and they become as limp as a rag doll. Cataplexy also happens to non-narcoleptic people during REM sleep, but in those with narcolepsy, they remain fully alert when this occurs. Genetic abnormalities boost the risk of narcolepsy, and some people develop it after a brain tumor or accident causes brain damage. Orexin plays a key role in triggering sudden bouts of sleepiness. People with narcolepsy have abnormally few cells that produce this hormone, and medications that either replace it or mimic it may cure narcolepsy one day. Sleep apnea is a disorder caused by a blockage of the airway during sleep, resulting in daytime fatigue. This affects between 2 and 20% of the general population, depending on how broadly or narrowly it's defined. This condition causes people to snore loud, gasp for air, and sometimes stop breathing for more than 20 seconds. This results in them not sleeping well and often waking multiple times throughout the night. A lack of oxygen can lead to a lot of problems, including weight gain, fatigue, hearing loss, and irregular heartbeat. Because apnea is often associated with obesity, doctors typically recommend weight loss as a preliminary treatment. And many people benefit from wearing what's known as a CPAP machine, which is, for anyone that's seen Alien, it looks like those things, the face huggers, and it's on a tube attached to a little machine, and it aids in providing them oxygen while they sleep. Another kind of sleep disorder is night terrors, which is sudden waking episodes characterized by screaming, perspiring, and confusion, followed by a return to a deep sleep. These are often more disturbing to onlookers than to sleepers. The person experiencing these can display screaming, crying, perspiring, confusion, and thrashing. These episodes typically only last for a few minutes. And these episodes aren't associated with vivid dreaming. In fact, they only occur in non-REM sleep. So sleepwalking, I'm sure 99% of you know what sleepwalking is, but walking while fully asleep. So those that sleepwalk have even been known to drive cars or turn on computers while asleep. Sleepwalkers aren't actually living out their dreams because sleepwalking occurs in non-REM sleep. It's also perfectly safe to wake a sleepwalker despite what TV shows may tell you. As far as sexsomnia, this is when people engage in sexual activities while asleep. Didn't know it was a thing. So yeah. Dreaming is a virtually universal experience. Some people report never dreaming, but it's more likely that they just don't remember their dream. Fun fact, even people that are blind have dreams, but if their dream contains visual imagery or not depends on when they became blind. Those blinded before age 4 don't have visual imagery in their dreams, but those blinded after age 7 do have visual imagery. There are also some cross-cultural consistencies in dreaming. Almost all of us have dreams that contain more aggression than friendliness, more negative than positive emotions, and more misfortune than good fortune. There are also some culturally unique factors as well. Dreams from those in more advanced societies feature fewer animals than those in small traditional societies. Scientists still don't know why we dream, but there's a lot of evidence from a variety of sources suggesting that dreams are involved in processing emotional memories, integrating new experiences with established memories to make sense of and create a model of the world, learning new strategies and ways of doing things, simulating threatening events so we can better cope with them in everyday life, reorganizing and consolidating memories. So, of course, Freud has a theory for this. He has a theory for everything. So, Babylonians believed dreams were sent by the gods. Assyrians believed dreams contained signs or omens of the future. Greeks built dream temples in which visitors awaited prophecies sent by the gods during dreams. And North Native Americans believed that dreams revealed hidden wishes and desires. So Freud sided with the Native Americans and believed dreams are the guardians of sleep. During sleep, the ego, which acts as a mental censor, is less able than when awake to keep sexual and aggressive instincts at bay by repressing them. If it wasn't for dreams, these instincts would boil over and disturb sleep. The dream work disguises and contains the threatening, sexual, and aggressive impulses by transforming them into symbols that represent wish fulfillment, so how we wish things could be. Freud also believed dreams required interpretation. He distinguished between manifest contents, which is the details of the dream itself, and latent content, which is the dream's true hidden meaning. Most psychologists have rejected Freud's theories on dreams, not surprising. Freud also believed most dreams are sexual in nature, but sexual dreams only account for like 10% of dreams. Another challenge to Freud's theory is that most dreams aren't disguised as he believed. About 90% of dreams are straightforward. And nightmares definitely are not wish fulfillments and are not uncommon. While nightmares can be disturbing, a recent meta-analysis found that people who wrote down the nightmare and rehearsed it had decreases in their nightmares and improvements in their sleep quality resulting from a decrease in nightmares. So activation synthesis theory. This theory claims that dreams reflect inputs from brain activation originating in the pons, which the forebrain then attempts to weave into a story. So basically, dreams are the brain's attempt to make sense of random and internally generated neural signals during REM sleep. The balance of neurotransmitters in the brain shifts constantly. For REM to kick online, acetylcholine increases while serotonin and norepinephrine decrease drastically. Acetylcholine activates the pons at the base of the brain, while dwindling levels of serotonin and norepinephrine decrease reflective thought, reasoning, attention, and memory. The pons send signals to the thalamus, which is a relay station for sensory information, to the language and visual areas of the forebrain. and the forebrain tries to make sense of all of this information. The amygdala is also involved, adding emotions like fear, anxiety, anger, sadness, and happiness. The net result of all of this is what we know as a dream. So if you direct your attention to the little diagram over here, as you can see, it starts in the pons, and then we see spreading activation throughout the rest of the brain, in the cerebral cortex, the amygdala, stuff like that. So a researcher by the name of Hobson has described dreaming as proto-consciousness, which he described as a primitive or primary state of brain organization that starts to develop before birth in the uterus and is a building block of consciousness. While our ability to reason shrinks, the brain is free to generate a working virtual reality model of the world, which assists the person in making accurate predictions in everyday life. So, dreaming and the forebrain. This is essentially an alternative to the activation synthesis theory. So one study of 332 cases of patients with brain damage from stroke, tumors, and injury showed that damage to the parietal lobes and to the deep frontal white matter, which connects different parts of the cortex to the lower parts of the brain, can lead to complete loss of dreaming. It's likely that the damaged areas are pathways that allow brain centers involved in dreaming to communicate, so damage to the forebrain can stop dreams entirely, even when the brainstem is working properly. And then we also have neurocognitive perspectives on dreaming. So neurocognitive theory is the theory that dreams are a meaningful product of our cognitive capacities, which shape what we dream about. When awoken from REM sleep, kids age 7 or 8 only recall about 20 to 30% of the time, only recall dreaming about 20 to 30% of the time, as compared to adults who recall dreaming 80 to 90% of the time. While we're young, our dreams are simpler, and they get more complex as we age. And dreams are surprisingly stable. One woman kept a dream journal for almost 50 years, and 6 themes accounted for more than 75% of her dream content. So with consciousness comes alterations to consciousness. So the first one is hallucinations, which are realistic perceptual experiences in the absence of any external stimuli. These can occur in any sensory modality, meaning they can occur with each sense. So brain scans show that sensory cortices light up when there is a hallucination. For example, the visual cortex lights up when there is a visual hallucination. One frequent misconception is that hallucinations only occur in the mentally disturbed, which is not true. Between 10 and 14% and as many as 39% of college students and people in the general public report having hallucinations during the day at least once, even when not taking drugs or experiencing psychological problems. Have you ever felt like something was crawling on you when nothing was there? That was a hallucination. Have you ever thought someone called your name but no one did? That was a hallucination. Visual hallucinations can also be brought on by oxygen and sensory deprivation, epilepsy, fever, dementia, and migraines. Auditory hallucinations can occur when patients mistakenly attribute their thoughts or inner speech to an external source. 2 more types of alterations of consciousness are out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. Out-of-body experience is a sense of our consciousness leaving our body. About 25% of college students and 10% of the general public report having at least one out-of-body experience. People prone to out-of-body experiences also report experiencing unusual phenomenon like lucid dreams, hallucinations, and strange body sensations in everyday life. Some people also experience them when using psychedelic drugs, taking medication, having a migraine or seizure, or when they're either extremely relaxed or extremely stressed. Even though the media portrays these episodes as being able to wander outside of our bodies, research has shown that even though people may report distant sounds or sights, the reports were inaccurate or a good guess at best. Therefore, there is no evidence that people are floating out of their bodies, even though it may seem that way to them. Some possible explanations: our sense of self depends on complex interplay of sensory information, and when the input of that information is scrambled, the result is a disruption of our experience of our physical body. Ketamine users often report out-of-body experiences because ketamine can cause feelings of detachment from the physical world and disrupt patterns of brain activity. Out-of-body experiences can also occur during near-death experiences. These are experiences reported by people who've nearly died or thought they were going to die. About 25% of those that report near-death experiences reported experiencing an out-of-body experience. Near-death experiences have been widely portrayed in books, movies, and other kinds of media. It's generally described as walking down a dark tunnel toward a bright light, seeing your life flash before your eyes, etc. Not every near-death experience follows this exact script, but most are very close. Roughly between 6 and 33% of people who have almost died reported near-death experiences. The estimate fluctuates based on which report you read. As with everything, there are cultural differences. Those of Christian and Buddhist beliefs experience walking down the tunnel, but those who were natives of North America, Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, or Australia did not. One explanation for near-death experiences may be that they result from a rush of endorphins to a dying brain, and buzzing, ringing, or other noise may just be the result of an oxygen-deprived brain. Researchers have found interesting phenomena in those who are about to die. One study found a sharp increase in gamma waves just before death. Another found that this increase was due to a huge release of neurotransmitters. So mystical experiences are feelings of unity or oneness with the world, often with strong spiritual overtones. Now, for anyone in the sociology field who's familiar with the term collective effervescence, this is not the same because this has spiritual overtones, and it's more with a unity with the entire world as opposed to just one group of people. One description of these can be found in the music of the 80s band ABBA, you know, the band that sings Dancing Queen. And these kinds of experiences have been reported through the ages in association with prayer, fasting, medication, and social isolation, but they differ across faiths. Christians usually describe these in terms of awe-inspiring merging with God's presence, but Buddhists often describe them in terms of bliss and selfless peace. As many as 35% of Americans reported that they had felt close to a powerful, uplifting spiritual force at least once. Since these experiences are rare and fleeting, it's extremely difficult to study them in the lab. So one approach that has been used is inducing mystical experiences and observing their consequences. So scientists used functional MRI to scan the brains of 15 Catholic nuns after asking them to relive the most intense state of union they've had with another human in one condition, then asking them to do the same with the most intense mystical experience they've had in the experimental condition. The mystical experiences condition produced distinct brain activation. 12 areas of the brain associated with emotion, perception, and cognition became active. If these researchers actually captured a mystical experience or not is still up for debate. The second approach that has been used is having individuals without a history of mental illness ingest psilocybin, a hallucinogenic drug that affects serotonin receptors. At the 14-month follow-up, 58% of participants reported having a mystical experience, which they called one of the most meaningful events of their lives. 2/3 of those that had a mystical experience rated the experience as one of their top 5 most spiritually significant moments and reported increased life satisfaction. And then we have hypnosis, which is a set of techniques that provides people with suggestions for alterations in their perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. To increase suggestibility, hypnotists use an induction method, which typically includes suggestions for relaxation, calmness, and well-being, along with instructions to imagine or think about pleasant experiences. When suggestions are self-administered, the procedures are called self-hypnosis. While hypnosis was considered pseudoscientific for a long time, it has made its way into the mainstream of science and clinical practice. It actually has a wide range of clinical applications. It enhances the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral psychotherapies. It's also useful for treating pain, medical conditions like obesity, anxiety, and habit disorders like smoking. Because there's no evidence that hypnosis is an effective treatment by itself, we should be skeptical of professional hypnotherapists. So there are a few theories of hypnosis. The first is sociocognitive theory, and this is an approach to explaining hypnosis based on people's attitudes, beliefs, expectations, and responsiveness to waking suggestions. People's expectations of whether they'll respond to hypnotic suggestions are correlated with how they respond, but this correlation does not mean there is a causal relationship. Studies have shown that a training program that increases people's positive beliefs and expectancies about hypnosis and their willingness to imagine, along with suggestions, increases their ability to respond to hypnosis. And then we have the dissociation theory, which is an approach to explaining hypnosis based on a separation between personality functions that are normally well integrated. So, dissociation is a division of consciousness in which attention, effort, and planning are carried out without awareness. So, substance use disorders. So, psychoactive drugs are substances that contain chemicals similar to those naturally found in our brains that alter consciousness by changing chemical processes in neurons. And drugs are any substance that change the way we think, feel, or act. This includes caffeine, nicotine, and sugar. While they are commonplace and perfectly legal, they're still technically drugs. So, how do we diagnose someone with a substance use disorder? So, I do want to say, with a little caveat here, this does change from edition of DSM. So, from 4 to 5, it's a little different. So, generally speaking, people qualify for the diagnosis when they experience recurrent significant impairment or distress associated with one or more drugs. This has recently been recognized as a disorder in the DSM-5, which is the most recent DSM. With that being said, substance use was recognized earlier, but it was broken down into different categories. This definition just combines them. So tolerance is the reduction in effect of a drug as a result of repeated use, requiring users to consume greater quantities to achieve the same effect. This is often associated with increases in the amount of drugs people consume. Withdrawal is unpleasant effects of reducing or stopping consumption of a drug that users had consumed habitually. One example is delirium tremens, or the DTs, which are symptoms associated with severe alcohol withdrawal. Symptoms include severe confusion, nervous or angry behavior, extreme hyperactivity, loss of consciousness, hallucinations. A common one is feeling like bugs are crawling on people's skin, sleep disturbances, fever, high blood pressure, rapid heartbeat, excessive sweating, and dehydration. If left untreated, the DTs have a death rate of 37%. General symptoms of withdrawal include seizures, confusion, and anxiety. People can also experience both physical and psychological dependence. So physical dependence is dependence on a drug that occurs when people continue to take it to avoid withdrawal symptoms. Psychological dependence is non-physiological dependence on a drug that occurs when continued use of the drug is motivated by intense cravings. So why do people get addicted? There is no one answer. As with everything in psychology, everything is multifaceted. There are multiple different influences that can determine if people will get addicted or if they'll even try a certain drug. So people often begin using drugs when they become available. So when their family or peers approve of them, commonly depicted as peer pressure, and when they don't anticipate serious consequences from their use. Use typically begins in early adolescence, peaks in early adulthood, and sharply declines thereafter. Then, of course, we have sociocultural influences. In cultures where certain substances, the use of them is strictly prohibited, like alcohol use among Mormons or Muslims, there is very low use of those substances. Some cultures normalize the use of one substance more, so the use of that substance goes up, i.e., smoking in Muslim countries or drinking in France or Italy. So I'm sure people have heard the term or maybe even used the term addictive personality. So sociocultural differences don't exactly explain the differences within cultures. Research has shown there is no one single addictive personality profile, but certain personality traits can predispose people to abuse alcohol and other drugs. For example, included is impulsivity, tendency to seek high levels of novel and stimulating sensory experiences, so adrenaline junkies, sociability, propensity to experience negative emotions like anxiety and hostility. And then, of course, there's the learning factor. So according to attention reduction hypothesis, people consume drugs and alcohol to reduce anxiety. This self-medication reinforces drug use, increasing the probability of continued use. Some drugs affect the reward cycle in the brain, as well as dopamine, which is highly involved in the reward cycle. However, once they become dependent on a substance, alcohol specifically, the discomfort of their withdrawal symptoms can motivate drug-seeking behavior and continued use. Then, of course, we have genetic factors. Alcoholism does tend to run in some families. If alcoholism was due to nature or nurture was a highly debated topic for a long time. Recent research has found that genetic factors do, in fact, play a key role in the vulnerability to alcoholism. It seems that multiple genes are involved, but it is unclear exactly which genes are involved. Different substances. So the first class of substances we will be talking about is depressants. So alcohol and sedative hypnotics are depressant drugs because they depress the effects of the central nervous system. So a sedative is a drug that exerts a calming effect. Hypnotic is a drug that exerts a sleep-inducing effect. And then we have alcohol. So some scientists speculate that a long-forgotten person from the late Stone Age, maybe 10,000 years ago, accidentally consumed a jar of honey that had been left out just a little too long. Alcohol is the most widely used and abused drug. While many people believe alcohol is a stimulant, it is mainly a depressant. It behaves as an emotional and physiological stimulant only at relatively low doses because it depresses areas of the brain that inhibit emotion and behavior. Small amounts can promote relaxation, elevate mood, increase talkativeness, and actively lower inhibitions. In most states, the blood alcohol concentration, or BAC, limit is 0.08 for legal driving. Short-term effects of intoxication are directly related to BAC. Contrary to popular belief, switching between different types of alcohol does not speed up the alcohol absorption into the bloodstream. All standard drinks consume the same type of the same amount of alcohol. The feeling of intoxication just depends on the amount of alcohol in the bloodstream, aka BAC. So for anyone who's not familiar what a standard drink is, I have it outlined here. So 12 fluid ounces of regular beer, 8 to 9 fluid ounces of malt liquor, 5 fluid ounces of table wine, 1.5 fluid ounces and a shot of 80 proof spirits, which is most standard hard liquors. And if you get a drink from a restaurant or a bar, it will be a standard drink. Another factor is the more food in your stomach, the slower alcohol consumption will be. There's actually an eating/drinking disorder called drunkorexia, which is where an individual will deliberately deprive themselves of food so they become more intoxicated more quickly. This is dangerous. This is unhealthy. Do not do this, please. And then the effects of alcohol and the perception of the effects of alcohol are often studied with a balanced placebo design. So a drug's effects are influenced by the dose of the drug, but there's also the user's expectations of how they will react to the drug. So the balanced placebo design uses 4 groups. You have 2 groups, one where they are told the substance will provide an effect, 2 where they actually get the substance, and then you can see how that lays out here. So if they get a placebo, they're told they will not have an effect, that is the baseline. If they get the substance and are told they will not have an effect, then that is purely the effect of the substance. If they're given a placebo and told that they will have an effect, then that is a placebo effect. And if they're told they will have an effect and they receive the substance, that is your actual effect. Results of these studies show that at low alcohol dose levels, culturally learned expectations influence mood and complex social behaviors. Those in the placebo effect group act drunk. The setting or social context in which people consume alcohol also influences its effects. Another depressant, as mentioned before, is sedative hypnotics. So when people have trouble falling asleep or are overly anxious, they will probably be prescribed something from this class. Sedative hypnotics are usually broken into 3 categories. We have barbiturates, non-barbiturates, and benzodiazepines, commonly called benzos. Barbiturates are any class of sedative and sleep-inducing drugs derived from barbituric acid. These have the highest potential of abuse because they mimic the effects of alcohol. One example of this is Seconal. Non-barbiturates are sedative hypnotics not made from barbituric acid. Benzodiazepines are a type of prescription sedative commonly prescribed for anxiety or to help with insomnia. These work to calm or sedate a person by raising the level of GABA in the brain. And then to your right, you can see the effects of depressants. We have euphoria, nausea, confidence, vomiting, dependence, mood swings, unconsciousness, coma, and the last one was death. I accidentally flipped ahead of slide. The next class we look at is stimulants. So a stimulant is a drug that increases activity in the central nervous system, including heart rate, respiration, and blood pressure. The most common ones are nicotine, cocaine, and amphetamines. Over time, people have consumed tobacco in various ways: smoking, chewing, inhaling through hookah or a water pipe. Nicotine in tobacco is a potent and addictive drug. Nicotine activates receptors sensitive to acetylcholine, which is why smokers report feelings of relaxation and alertness. Nicotine has adjuctive value, meaning it can enhance positive emotional reactions and minimize negative emotional reactions, including distress experienced when nicotine levels drop. Cocaine, this is the most powerful natural stimulant. Users commonly report euphoria, enhanced mental and physical capability, stimulation, a decrease in hunger, indifference to pain, and a sense of well-being accompanied by diminished fatigue. Cocaine was widely used in medicines and Coca-Cola. Where do you think the Coca came from? In the 1800s and early 1900s. However, it came under strict government control in 1906. Cocaine use has become so prevalent, trace amounts are found on about 90% of US dollar bills. So if you ever handle cash, or if you handle cash on a regular basis, make sure you wash your hands pretty frequently. Cocaine is also a powerful reinforcer, and this accounts for a lot of its appeal as an illicit drug of choice and its addictive properties. Heavy use of cocaine makes people want to use it more. It increases the activity of neurotransmitters dopamine and maybe serotonin, which increase its reinforcing effects. It also affects brain regions and activities associated with monitoring behavior, insight, and emotional self-awareness, fueling the addictive effects of this substance. Some users inject cocaine intravenously, some snort/inhale it. Crack cocaine is a concentrated form that can be smoked. So one important thing I do want to note here is powder cocaine tends to be expensive. So it's used more by wealthier individuals who can afford it, while crack cocaine is cheaper, so it is more used by poorer people. These two facts combined have created a sentencing differential in drug offenses. Those who are caught with crack cocaine tend to receive harsher and longer sentences, whereas those caught with powder cocaine tend to receive lighter and shorter sentences. Now, amphetamines. These are among the most commonly abused drugs. Amphetamines illustrate how different patterns of use can produce different subjective effects. The first pattern involves occasional use of small doses of oral amphetamines to postpone fatigue, elevate mood, cram for a test, or experience well-being. So, students without ADD or ADHD who use Adderall to study for a test fall under this pattern. And the second pattern, users obtain amphetamines from a doctor but ingest them on a regular basis for euphoria-producing effects rather than their prescribed purpose. So individuals who obtain Adderall from a doctor but use it to get high instead of actually its intended purpose fall under this pattern. The third pattern is associated with street users, commonly known as speed freaks, who ingest large doses of amphetamines intravenously, meaning they inject it, to achieve the rush of pleasure immediately following the injection. These individuals are likely to be restless, talkative, excited, and to inject amphetamines repeatedly to prolong euphoria. In recent years, methamphetamine has emerged as a drug of abuse. In its crystalline form, it's highly addictive, which is the most powerful form. Meth destroys tissues and blood vessels. Prolonged abuse of meth can also degrade the brain. I don't remember if it affects the white matter or the gray matter, but it definitely degrades portions of the brain following prolonged abuse. And I'm just going to pause here for a second and allow you to read the long list of symptoms, most of which I already outlined. Then also note that caffeine is considered a stimulant, even though the chapter doesn't really go into it a whole lot. The next class of drugs we'll be talking about are narcotics. And these are drugs that relieve pain and induce sleep, also known as opioids and opiates. So opioid drugs include heroin, morphine, and codeine, which are derived from the opium poppy found in Asia. These are widely cultivated in what are known as poppy fields, most of which are located in an area known as the Golden Triangle. This area is about 950,000 square kilometers that overlaps the mountains of 3 adjacent countries, Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar. Of course, this is not the only area where poppies are cultivated. They're grown in a lot of other places as well, including South America and parts of Central America. Heroin is one of the most potent narcotics and accounts for about 90% of opioid abuse. However, with the emergence of fentanyl, these numbers may be outdated. The euphoric effects of heroin only last about 3 to 4 hours. If a heroin addict doesn't take another dose in 4 to 6 hours, they will experience violent withdrawal sickness that heroin addicts often refer to as dope sickness. Another issue with heroin is in recent years, the price has increased drastically and the purity has plummeted. Because of this, more people have overdosed from heroin. Part of the reason for this is the use of fentanyl to cut heroin, making it more lethal. Unfortunately, as anyone who has watched a cartel or drug documentary can tell you, if someone overdoses on a specific supplier's product, more drug addicts will flock to them because they think it's more potent. And this inevitably leads to more overdoses. Even infrequent users risk becoming addicted, but addiction is not inevitable. Those who use it for pain relief and take it as prescribed likely won't become addicted. However, if they begin to change their dosage on their own accord, there's a good chance they will become addicted. Scientists believe one of the many reasons the U.S. is experiencing an opioid crisis is the overprescription of OxyContin for legitimate medical purposes in the 90s. Because of this, a lot of drug abusers obtain prescription pain relievers to get high. Unfortunately, injecting or taking OxyContin or mixing it with other substances like alcohol can be lethal. Many of those who abuse prescription drugs eventually move to illicit opioids like heroin. About 40% of heroin users reported abusing prescription drugs before moving to heroin. Last but not least is psychedelics. So scientists describe drugs like LSD, mescaline, PCP, and ecstasy as hallucinogenic, meaning they cause dramatic alterations to perception, mood, and thought. So they included marijuana under this categorization. And this is the most commonly used illegal drug in the U.S. I say illegal because it's widely becoming legalized for both medical and recreational use in multiple states. And even if it's not being legalized, some states are reducing their penalties for those found with marijuana. Most effects from marijuana come from its active ingredient THC. Users report short-term effects, including a sense of time slowing down, enhanced sensation of touch, increased appreciation for sounds, hunger, feelings of well-being, and tendency to giggle. At higher doses, users may experience disturbances in short-term memory, exaggerated emotions, and an altered sense of self. Scientists are trying to better understand the long-term effects. While marijuana produces more damage to cells than tobacco smoke does, scientists haven't found consistent evidence for serious physical health or fertility consequences of marijuana use. Chronic use can damage attention and memory, though. While some research has been done, most of it is correlational data, because you can't assign someone to participate in an experimental condition that you don't know the long-term effects of just yet. Synthetic marijuana has made the press in recent years, such as K2, which is a synthetic marijuana made of herbs sprayed with chemicals. Some research has also argued that marijuana is a gateway drug, meaning use of marijuana will eventually lead to the use of harder drugs like cocaine. This claim is still debated and the evidence is inconsistent, so it's definitely to be taken with a grain of salt. Some support it, some don't. Then we have LSD, which was first created in 1943. Those who ingested LSD in an experiment displayed decreased electrical activity, increased blood flow, and greatly increased communication among neural networks, especially those connected to the visual cortex. These effects were correlated with the drug's hallucinatory effects. As those connections increased, activity in other areas was damped down, creating a feeling of ego dissolution, aka a dissolving sense of self. In studies of LSD and psilocybin, researchers have observed increased levels of communication in areas of the brain that don't typically communicate with each other. This may cause the famous LSD trip. And then we have ecstasy and MDMA. This drug has stimulant and hallucinogenic properties. It produces cascades of the neurotransmitter serotonin in the brain, which increases self-confidence and well-being, and produces powerful feelings of empathy for others. An interesting part of LSD's history is the CIA program called MKUltra to explore LSD's potential as a mind control drug. This involved the CIA dosing unsuspecting individuals, including Army scientists, and after some unseemly incidents, they had to move to testing on drug addicts and prostitutes. The full scope of this program was not discovered until the program was ended in 1972. So just a couple quick housekeeping things. Remember, quizzes for chapters 1, 2, 3, and 5 are due Saturday, February 20th at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time, and Exam 1 is due Sunday, February 21st, 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. And again, if something comes up and you think you might miss the exam, even if you don't end up missing it, if you think you might, you have to let me know beforehand. I can help beforehand, I can't help after the fact.